I never thought humiliation could come wrapped in silk and champagne. There I was, sitting in the third row at my younger sister's wedding, wearing the only formal dress I owned. I had done my best to blend in, into a room full of people who looked so polished, so perfect, people who belonged. Beside me sat my son, Luca, swinging his legs under the table in a tiny suit I had stretched 2 paychecks to afford. He looked so proud, so happy to be there. He thought this day would bring us closer to the family again. Maybe I hoped that too. Vivian, my sister, floated through the day like a movie star. She always had that glow, beautiful, effortless, charming, adored, especially by our mother. She got the compliments, I got the comparisons. She got the spotlight, I learned to live in the shadows. But still, I showed up. I smiled. I clapped when they kissed. I kept my voice steady when people leaned in and said things like, "You're the older sister? You don't look like you have an 8-year-old." Then came the speeches. The groom's best friend went first. Some mildly funny stories, light laughter. Then it was Vivian's turn. I expected something sentimental, something about love, maybe a shared childhood memory. I even raised my glass in anticipation. I should have known better. She stood radiant, holding her crystal flute, smiling as if she was about to sing. "I want to thank everyone for coming. It means the world to have you here. And, of course, I want to say something special about my big sister." I turned to Luca and smiled. He looked up at me with such excitement, wide eyes and wonder. For a moment, I believed she was going to say something kind, something real. Ava's been such a role model. She's a single mom, strong, independent, and clearly unwanted by anyone else. Laughter. Laughter filled the room, harsh, echoing laughter. My stomach flipped. I thought I misheard her, but she smiled wider. She was proud of that line, like it was her best joke yet. Some guests looked confused. Others laughed harder, clinking their glasses like it was just some light-hearted banter. I didn't know where to look. My heart pounded in my ears. Then Luca, my sweet boy, tugged at my sleeve and whispered, "Why did she say that about you, Mama?" Before I could answer, my mother chimed in, loud enough for everyone to hear, like a punchline to the cruelty. "She's a used product. But hey, she still looks good for her age." More laughter, sharper this time. Cruel. The kind of laughter that cuts through skin. The kind that lets you know you are no longer seen as family, but as entertainment, as pity, as shame. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. My face burned, but I refused to cry. Not in front of Luca, not in front of them. My fingers curled into the napkin beneath the table, gripping it like a rope. I looked around the room, desperate for a kind face, for someone to meet my eyes and say, "That was wrong." I looked around the room, searching for a lifeline. A kind face. Someone, anyone, who might meet my eyes and say with a look, "You don't deserve this." But my grandfather stared down at his plate. My cousin scrolled on her phone, smirking. Even my uncle, the one who once said I had my father's eyes, couldn't bring himself to look at me. Luca did. He looked up at me, eyebrows scrunched in confusion, pain flickering across his little face. That was what broke me. Not the insult, not the laughter, not the shame. It was my son, watching, trying to understand why the woman who packed his lunch, helped him with math, stayed up when he had nightmares, was the family joke. I wanted to get up, grab his hand, walk out and never come back. But I couldn't move. My throat burned. My hands shook under the table. And then a chair scraped against the floor, loud, jarring. The room fell silent. Callum, the groom, was standing. Vivian's fiancé, clean-cut, perfect smile, the kind of man they said she deserved. He wasn't smiling now. He didn't look at Vivian. He didn't look at our mother. He didn't even look at the guests. He looked at me. And something in his eyes made the air go still. That was the moment I knew this wasn't just another jab. It wasn't another night I'd swallow the pain just to keep the peace. This was different. This was the crack in the glass. Let me pause and tell you something about me. I'm Lara. I'm 34, a single mom, the disappointment, the example of what not to become. I live in a tiny apartment on the edge of town with my son, Luca. He's 8. He still thinks I hung the moon. I work mornings at a cafe and nights at a hotel front desk. I don't sleep much, but I manage because I have to, because he needs me, because no one else ever really did. My family, they don't see what I've built. They only see what I lost. My mother, Judith, has spent years pretending I'm a stain on the family name. Every glance, every backhanded compliment, well, Vivian would never. Vivian, my sister, 5 years younger. She's the favorite, always has been. She wears her privilege like perfume, everything handed to her, and somehow she still plays the role of the humble bride. She gets silk handkerchiefs. I get told to toughen up. When I got pregnant with Luca, I was 25. I believed in love. I believed in him. By month 5, he was gone. No goodbye, no explanation. And I learned, fast and alone, how to survive. That's who I am. And now, here I was, sitting in a room full of people who decided I was a punchline. A single mother slur in heels and borrowed pride. With my son beside me, still holding on to hope, as the people we called family laughed at me like I was dirt. And yet, Callum was still standing, still silent. The room was holding its breath, and I could feel it, something shifting. Not a rescue, not a fairy tale. By the 5th month, he was gone. No note, no explanation, just gone. My family didn't ask questions, they didn't offer help. They gave me silence, judgment, I told you so. But I had Luca, and the moment I held him, all their cruel words turned to white noise. Still, deep down, I kept hoping they'd see me one day. Not just as a single mom, but as someone worth loving. Maybe that's why when Vivian's wedding invitation came, I said yes. Even though I wasn't in the bridal party, even though they spelled my name wrong on the RSVP, even though I had to rent a dress and do my own hair in the bathroom mirror while Luca stood beside me, practicing his smile in a wrinkled clip-on tie. I told myself I was going for closure, that maybe, just maybe, this was their quiet way of saying, "We're ready to make room for you again." The venue was breathtaking. White roses, gold-accented tableware, a string quartet playing in the distance. Vivian looked like she'd walked off the cover of a bridal magazine. All smiles and sparkle, basking in every compliment and camera flash. When she finally passed me, her smile faltered for just a second. "You made it," she said, like she hadn't expected I would. She looked at Luca. He's getting big. No hug, no warmth, just small talk, then back to the spotlight. My mother, Judith, didn't acknowledge me at all. She walked past me like I was one of the servers. But Luca, he was glowing. He whispered that the chandelier looked like a spaceship, that Vivian looked like a princess. And when I saw how happy he was just being there, I told myself, stay. For him, even though that familiar ache of not belonging was already settling in my chest. They put us at table 9, near the back, by the restrooms. I laughed to myself. Fitting. I helped Luca eat his salad, wiped chocolate mousse from his tie, avoided eye contact with my mother, tried not to flinch every time I heard my name whispered between clinking glasses. Then the speeches started. And I knew. This night wasn't about family, not about forgiveness, not about healing. It was Vivian's show, and I was about to become her punchline. It began like most wedding speeches, warm, sugary, just a bit too rehearsed. Vivian stood up, holding a champagne flute in one perfectly manicured hand. Her dress shimmered beneath the reception lights. The room hushed. She smiled, waiting just long enough for the attention to land squarely on her. "I want to thank all of you for being here," she began, glowing. "It's the happiest day of my life, and I'm surrounded by the people who mean everything to me." I sat at the back, trying to believe I was part of that sentence. Luca perched on the edge of his chair, looking up at her with wide eyes, hopeful. Luca was perched on the edge of his chair, kicking his legs beneath the table, completely enchanted by the fairy tale of it all. The chandeliers, the music, the magic. Vivian went on, speaking sweetly, about Callum, about love, about fate and timing. I began to exhale, maybe, just maybe, this wouldn't turn cruel. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe she would spare me just this once. Then, she shifted. And of course, she said, that familiar sly smile curling at the edges of her lips. I want to give a shout out to my big sister. The spotlight moved, I felt it. Eyes turned toward me like searchlights. I sat up a little straighter. I smiled politely. I braced. Vivian's voice remained light, but her words had teeth. She's the bravest woman I know. She raised a child on her own. No husband, no partner, just her. And well, whoever was kind enough to babysit. Soft chuckles rolled across the room. My stomach tightened. But seriously, she added, it's incredible how she's managed. A single mom, unwanted by anyone, but still showing up. Laughter. Not polite, not awkward, real, loud laughter. I felt the air leave my lungs. My cheeks burned. My hands froze around the napkin in my lap. I turned to Luca. He was frowning now, glancing around the room, confused, trying to understand why everyone was laughing at me. And then, the worst part. My mother, Judith, laughed louder than anyone else. She leaned toward her table, voice raised just enough to be heard. She's a used product, but she still polishes up well. Another wave of laughter, this one unfiltered, cruel. The kind that lets you know the joke isn't just at your expense. It is your identity. My vision blurred. It felt like being slapped, except no one touched me. Everyone just laughed, like it was normal. Like it was acceptable to humiliate a woman who had spent nearly a decade working 2 jobs, who missed meals so her son wouldn't, who learned how to fix leaky faucets and broken hearts, alone. Like being alone made me less. I looked down at Luca. His smile was gone. He leaned into me and whispered, "Why did she say that? What does she mean?" I opened my mouth. Nothing came out. I couldn't protect him from this. Not this moment. Not this room. I couldn't shield him from the way our family saw me, as a mistake, as someone to mock, not honor. My heart was pounding. I looked for an exit, for someone, anyone, who might say, enough. But no one did. Some looked uncomfortable. Most just looked away. Plates, glasses, phones. Even Grandpa Norman, who used to call me his little lion, couldn't meet my eyes. He was there, but he wasn't with me. And in that moment, I was alone. Again. The thing is, I could have taken it. If it were just me, I would have swallowed it, like I always have. But seeing the confusion in my son's eyes, watching him try to make sense of the clapping and toasting turning into laughter, broke something open in me. I stood, not because I had something to say, not to make a scene. I just needed to get out of that room. To breathe air that wasn't thick with judgment, to escape the shame they were piling onto my shoulders like a weighted veil. My hands trembled as I pushed my chair back. And then, another chair scraped loudly from the head table. Callum, the groom. He stood up. His face had gone pale, his jaw tight. Without a word, he reached across and took the microphone from Vivian's hand. Didn't ask, didn't smile. The room fell into an unnatural silence. The temperature felt like it dropped 10 degrees. No laughter, no whispers, only stillness. This wasn't in the plan. Everyone knew it. Callum stood there, one hand gripping the table, the other holding the mic. His eyes, not on Vivian, not on Judith, not even on the sea of uncomfortable guests. His eyes were on me. And for a flicker of a moment, I thought maybe he was going to smooth things over, say something witty, light, polished, brush it off, the way my family always did. Call it humor, call it tradition, wrap cruelty in a bow and pretend it was a gift. But Callum didn't smile. He didn't laugh. His face was tense, not with anger, with something deeper, disappointment, disbelief. I reached for Luca's hand. I was ready to leave, quietly, gracefully. I wasn't going to let them see me break. I'd done that before. I knew how to walk away with my dignity barely holding together. But as I turned to go, Callum's voice cut through the silence. "Lara, don't go." I froze. Everyone turned. A wave of whispers swept the tables like dry leaves scattering in wind. Vivian stiffened. Judith narrowed her eyes. Even the DJ reached toward the soundboard, but stopped when Callum lifted his hand. He never looked at them, only me. I can't pretend I'm okay with what just happened, he said, his voice low and unwavering. I won't stand up here and let that kind of cruelty pass as comedy. The room held its breath. Callum stepped out from behind the table. Every step was slow, deliberate, like he was walking through thick fog. He stopped right near our table, where I stood with Luca, beside our half-eaten salads. He turned to the guests. I've heard a lot about family over this past year, while planning this wedding, he said. About appearances, about tradition, about loyalty. But what I just saw, that wasn't family. That was mockery, dressed up as celebration. Chairs shifted, throats cleared. Some people looked at Judith. Others stared into their wine glasses like they were trying to disappear. No one said a word. Callum continued. Lara has done something none of you seem to understand. She raised a beautiful boy, with grace, with grit, and without help. And instead of applauding her, you humiliate her in front of her child. Do you think that's strength? He asked the room. That it's bold to laugh at a woman who's already done more alone than most of us have together? No one spoke. Callum turned to Vivian. You mocked your sister for being a single mother, for raising a child alone, and worse, you made her son watch it happen. Vivian opened her mouth. No words came out. Callum didn't wait. She didn't ask to be in that position, but she showed up today. She sat in the back. She smiled. She brought her son here to witness your big day, and you turned that into a joke. I had never seen Vivian look small, not once in my life, until that moment. Her face paled. Her confidence cracked like glass underfoot. Callum turned back to the room. Lara didn't stand up here to defend herself. She didn't ask for sympathy. She's never needed a stage. But I can't stay silent, because if I'm about to marry into a family that calls cruelty humor and shame tradition, then I need to reconsider what kind of man I want to be. A gasp rippled through the crowd. At the table beside us, a woman whispered, "Is this real?" Someone dropped a fork. The sound rang out like a gunshot. Luca looked up at me with wide eyes, clutching my hand a little tighter. I didn't know what to do. I came here, expecting to survive the night. I never expected to be defended, not like this, and not in front of everyone. Callum looked down at Luca, and in the softest, clearest voice he said, "Your mom's the strongest person in this room, don't forget that." Then he turned back to the guests, one last time. "I think I've seen enough." With that, he set the microphone down, walked past Vivian, didn't even glance at her, and headed straight out the door. I stood frozen, Luca's hand wrapped in mine. No one clapped. No one moved. The music didn't start again. The chatter didn't return. It was like someone had drained the air from the room, like the fairy tale had shattered. But this time, I wasn't the one left in pieces. The moment Callum left the reception hall, something shifted. No polite recovery, no segue into the cake cutting, just silence. The only sounds were the low hum of the air conditioning and a single spoon clinking softly against glass. All eyes flicked between me, Vivian, and the door he'd walked through. Vivian stood frozen at the head table. Her perfect posture had collapsed, shoulders sagged, lip trembling. The golden glow she wore like armor had vanished. She looked around the room, but no one smiled back at her anymore. Some guests looked shocked. Some looked ashamed. A few, maybe the ones who had laughed the loudest, looked angry. Not at Callum, at her. Judith was the first to speak. She stood up so fast her chair screeched behind her. "What an ungrateful boy," she snapped. "He embarrassed you in front of everyone. Typical, just like your sister, selfish." But her voice, that voice that always held sway over the room, didn't land the way it used to. The crowd didn't laugh. No one rushed to agree. Her words just hung there, empty, flat. The power she'd always held in this family had cracked, and for the first time I realized they were finally starting to see her the way I always had. Judith's words fell flat, and for the first time in my life, I didn't shrink under her voice. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. I turned to Luca. He looked up at me, unsure. "Are we leaving?" he asked softly. "Yes, baby," I said, brushing his hair back. "We're going home." I stood tall as I took his hand. We walked toward the exit. The crowd parted like a tide. Some guests avoided my eyes. Others looked like they wanted to say something, but couldn't find the words. Halfway to the door, I heard my name. Lara. I turned. It was my grandfather, Norman. His pale eyes were rimmed with red. He stood slowly, stepping forward. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I should have stopped it. Years ago." I nodded, unable to trust myself to speak. I didn't hate him for not defending me. I understood what silence costs some people. I'd lived it, but I wasn't carrying their guilt anymore. Outside, the air was cool, crisp. Luca squeezed my hand. "Is the wedding over?" I looked down at him, smiled. "Yeah," I said. "I think it ended exactly how it needed to." We drove home in silence, no radio, just the hum of tires on asphalt and the soft rhythm of Luca tapping the armrest. That night, I tucked him into bed, kissed his forehead, and lingered at the doorway a little longer than usual. He didn't ask more questions. He didn't need to. The next morning, my phone was buzzing. 12 missed calls. Unknown numbers, distant cousins, even guests I barely knew. I ignored them all. Then, a text. From a friend who had been at the wedding. Someone recorded Callum's speech. It's on Facebook. Over 50,000 views already. You need to see the comments. People are standing up for you. I opened the video. There it was. Callum's voice. Calm, direct. Speaking truth to a room that had never made space for mine. And there I was, too. Frozen in the frame, holding Luca's hand. The comments were flooding in. "This man is a hero. She deserved better. I'm crying watching this. Every single mom just got a little bit of justice." I didn't cry. I didn't even smile. I just felt still. Like something inside me, something that had been clenched for years, had finally let go. That week, Vivian tried to spin it. She said Callum overreacted, that it was just a joke, that people were too sensitive. But the truth had already landed, and no one was laughing anymore. A few days later, a small bouquet of wildflowers arrived at my door. No name, no message, just a simple card. To the lioness. I didn't need to ask who it was from. The wedding didn't happen, but something more important did. For once, I wasn't the one carrying the shame. And I wasn't the one left in pieces. The wedding that never happened. I wasn't the one who had to apologize. I walked out of that room with my son, my dignity, and my head held high. Somewhere out there, someone reminded a room full of people, and maybe the whole internet, what it really means to be strong. It's been 6 months since the wedding that never happened. Vivian and Callum officially called off the engagement. No statement, no dramatic post, just a quiet, clean erasure of what was supposed to be a perfect day. Vivian returned to her social circle like nothing had happened. The pictures from that night vanished from her feed. She hasn't reached out to me. I'm not sure I expected her to. Judith called once, not to apologize, just to tell me that I had embarrassed the family by not laughing along. I listened for exactly 30 seconds. Then, in the calmest voice I'd ever used with her, I said, "I'm not your scapegoat anymore." And I hung up. No yelling, no crying, just final. I realized, after everything, I didn't need a grand apology. I didn't need them to change, or finally recognize my worth, or beg to be forgiven. I just needed to stop waiting for their permission to see it in myself. My life didn't magically transform. I still work long hours. I still make 2 dinners some nights, because Luca wants pancakes and I need something green. But I walk differently now. I'm not hunched under the weight of quiet shame. I don't sit in the back of rooms anymore. I don't apologize for simply being seen. And Luca? He's changed too. He asks more questions now, smart ones. Why are some people cruel? Why are some brave? He talks about Callum like he's a Marvel hero. Sometimes I find him giving little speeches with his action figures lined up in rows, standing up for the ones who can't. And I know deep in my bones that he saw something that night that will shape the kind of man he'll grow up to be. Strong, gentle, unafraid to speak when it counts. One night, while we were brushing our teeth, Luca looked up at me in the mirror. "Mom," he asked, "are you still sad about what Aunt Vivian said?" I paused. Then I said, "Not anymore. Why?" He shrugged, toothpaste on his chin. "Because I think you won, even though it wasn't a fight." And that stayed with me. Because he was right. I didn't yell. I didn't insult anyone. I didn't demand justice. I didn't cry in front of a crowd. I simply stood up, held my son's hand, and walked away. And someone else, someone unexpected, decided that silence wasn't enough anymore. Callum didn't just stand up for me. He reminded every person in that room what love actually looks like. Not the kind that wears a tuxedo. Not the kind that walks down an aisle. Not the one that gets 1,000 likes. But the kind that stops the music. The kind that speaks when it's easier to stay quiet. The kind that chooses what's right, even when it ruins the script. The wedding didn't happen, but something better did. For once, I wasn't the one left in pieces. Not all love wears a tuxedo. Not all strength stands at the altar. Real love, real strength. It's the kind that sees someone being hurt and says, "No, not today." If I've learned anything, it's this. Being alone doesn't mean you're unwanted. Being kind doesn't make you weak. And dignity, once reclaimed, is something no one can take from you again. So no, I didn't dance at my sister's wedding. I didn't toast. I didn't toss a bouquet. I didn't cry happy tears under fairy lights. But I left with something better than approval. I left with my head high, my son beside me, and the deep, quiet certainty that I no longer need to explain myself to anyone. That was the ending no one expected, and exactly the one I deserved. If this story moved you, if you've ever been made to feel small or silenced in a room full of people who should have stood beside you, know this: your voice matters. Your dignity matters. You matter. If you found strength in this story, please take a moment to like the video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, leave a comment below. I'd love to know, have you ever had a moment where someone finally stood up for you? Or when you had to stand up for yourself? And if you want more true stories that cut deep, challenge expectations, and remind us what it means to be human, subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell, so you don't miss what's coming next. Thank you for being here. Revenge Stories love you all.